everybody. I would like to call the meeting to order and welcome everybody. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Education for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. I would ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. My name is Layla Goodridge and I am the MLA for Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche and the chair of this committee, and we will begin to my right.
Thanks, Layla. My name is David Egan. I'm the MLA for Edmonton Northwest, and I'm the deputy chair on this occasion. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Nate Horner, MLA Drumheller-Statler.
Good afternoon, everyone. MLA Jackie Lovely from the constituency of Camrose.
Good afternoon, Michaela Glasgow, MLA Brooks Medicine Hat.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Smith, Drayton Valley, Devon.
Good afternoon, Janice Irwin, Edmonton Highlands, Norwood.
And Sarah Hoffman, Edmonton, Glendora.
Now we will go to the members that are participating virtually. When I call your name, please introduce yourself for the record. Brad Rutherford.
Good afternoon, Brad Rutherford, MLA Leduc Beaumont.
And Richard Gottfried.
Richard Gottfried, MLA Calgary Fish Creek.
And Mickey Amory.
Good afternoon, committee members. Mickey Amory, Calgary Cross.
Thank you. So due to the current landscape we're all in, all ministry staff will be participating in the estimates debate virtually. We would ask ministry officials to please introduce themselves when they are called upon by the minister to speak. Do we need to introduce them again?
Just when they're called.
Minister, can I have you introduce yourself?
Yes, Minister of Education, Adriana LaGrange, and the MLA for Red Deer North.
We did introduce all the ministry officials earlier this morning, and we will just ask that any ministry officials, if they are called upon to speak, that they introduce themselves for the record before speaking. And I would like to note the following substitutions for the record. Mr. Egan as Deputy Chair for MLA Lori Sigurdsson, and Mr. Horner for Mr. Newdorf. Before we begin, I would note that in accordance with the recommendations from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, attendees at today's meeting are advised to leave the appropriate distance between themselves and other meeting participants. In addition, as indicated in the February 25th, 2021 memo from the Honourable Speaker Cooper, I would remind everyone of committee room protocols in line with health guidelines, which require members to wear masks in committee rooms and while seated, except when speaking, at which time they may choose not to wear a face covering. And a few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by the Hansard staff, and committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of the meeting will be found and accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. And to those participating virtually are asked to turn on their camera while speaking and to please mute their microphone when not speaking. To be placed on the speakers list, virtual participants should email or send a message to the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please wave or otherwise signal their intention to the chair. And I would ask that everyone please set your cell phone and any other device to silent for the duration of today's meeting. Honourable members, the standing order set out in the process for consideration of the main estimates, a total of 6 hours has been set out and scheduled for the consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Education. For the record, I would note that the Standing Committee on Families and Communities has already completed 3 hours of debate in this respect. As we enter our 4th hour of debate, I will remind everyone that the speaking rotation for these meetings is provided for under Standing Order 59016, and we are now at the point in the rotation where speaking times are limited to a maximum of 5 minutes for the member and the ministry. These speaking times may be combined for a maximum of 10 minutes. Please remember to advise the chair at the beginning of your rotation if you wish to combine your time with the ministers. One final note, please remember that discussion should flow through the chair at all times, regardless as to whether speaking times are combined. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please feel free to send an email or a message to the committee clerk about the process. With the concurrence of the committee, I will call a 5-minute break near the midpoint of the meeting. However, the 3-hour clock will continue to run. Does anyone have any opposition to holding a break? When we adjourned on March 10th, 2021, we were at 9 minutes and 20 some odd seconds into the exchange between Member Pancholi and the Minister. I will now invite MLA Hoffman to complete the remaining 37 seconds in this rotation. Minister and Member, sorry, and I just want to get quickly before we get started on that. Honorable members, I'd like to offer a clarification with regards to speaking times for members during main estimates. Once the maximum speaking time is reduced to 5 minutes at any one time, Standing Order 5902C, the time allotment is no longer considered a block. The member called upon in the appropriate point in the rotation may use up to 5 minutes at one time. The minister may then use up to 5 minutes in a response. However, if either the member or the minister chooses not to use the maximum 5 minutes allotted to them, they cannot return to complete the balance of their 5 minutes. Once the member and the minister have had their time to speak, the chair will call upon a member in the next group for their 5-minute speaking rotation. And I will ask Mr. Diol to introduce himself for the record.
Thank you. Jasbir Diol, MLA for Edmonton Meadows.
Thank you. And with that, we will go to...
Just clarify before, sorry, so it's different than how we conducted it this morning.
Yes.
So it is 5-minute blocks, essentially, you're saying.
And you can cede it to another member.
Okay, but we have to speak for 5 consecutive minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So for my 37 seconds, what I'm hoping to say, and I think it's even more pertinent now, is that we are here discussing the second biggest line item in the Government of Alberta's Treasury. I had the honor of participating in Treasury Board and Finance and Health estimates both yesterday. And I have to say I was definitely appreciative of the tone and the fact that we did do back and forth, because we were able to get clear questions. We were able to ask shorter questions and be less verbose in our lead up to the actual question, because we were able to get shorter answers. So I think it would be beneficial to the people of Alberta if the minister were to consider following that tradition. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, we now move on to the Government Caucus. And I believe we have Miss Lovely.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And Minister, wow, what an exciting announcement you've made today. I was able to watch it on Facebook, and I'm so glad that Camrose has a Catholic school design that's on the roster. So that's very exciting. My community is thrilled. I've started hearing from people already. And my question is on page 133 of the capital plan. It states the 3-year capital plan supports funding of $1.6 billion, including 14 projects for the construction of new schools, modernizations, and design work to support the school building priorities. So, Minister, my questions are, why is it important to invest in education infrastructure across the province for the next 3 years? And, Minister, would you be able to outline some of those 14 projects for the committee? And if you could, for my community, just define what design funding means so that they have a better understanding of what they can expect in the coming months.
Thank you, MLA Lovely. That is great questions, and I was so happy to be part of the announcement today. And it's always great news when we can provide new infrastructure and major modernization announcements. It is good news, and I'll just share with you what we have in existence right now. So the Alberta government is protecting its investment and planning for the future by maintaining and enhancing our existing school infrastructure and building new schools. Critically important to continue to build new schools. So right now, the capital plan includes $2.1 billion, and that's $2.1 billion over 3 years to maintain existing schools, to work on previously announced projects, of which there are 61, expand the modular program, and support 14 new school projects, as was announced today. So Budget 2021 includes over $1 billion in capital investment for education to continue to commit to fund school infrastructure, including $777 million managed by infrastructure to support the 61 projects that are currently underway in the province. So education's ongoing modular program and also 14 new school projects. So some of the important infrastructure projects Minister Panda and I were able to announce today were a new school for Calgary Catholic School Division in Airdrie, which was the board's #1 priority, and also Lethbridge received a new elementary school, and there was a new Francophone school that went to Sherwood Park, and I'll be happy to read the full list in a little while. So government will also spend $11.4 million on Lloydminster schools as capital grants, and this is part of our Saskatchewan-Alberta Charter Agreement. So there's $10.6 million for 2 Lloydminster projects and $0.8 million for the capital maintenance and renewal program. We are continuing to build much needed schools in every corner of the province, and that's so very important because they're needed right across the province. When we look at the actual capital list, you can see that there is a school in Fort Vermilion. And if you remember in the past, recent past, the school there was flooded. And although they did receive some funding from insurance, it wasn't enough to move to a new location. So it was felt that if we are actually going to build a new school in this area, we will take it away from the floodplain, which only makes sense, you would think. And so that new school will be going to full build, and it will be a K-12 school. The Southern Francophone Education Region will have a new K-6 and 7-12 complex in South Calgary. The Greater North Central Francophone Region will get a replacement and expansion of École Claudette des Tardifs School, which is a K-12 school. The Red Deer Catholic Separate School Division was announced in 2 budgets ago in 2019, a new middle school for design, and now it is going to full construction. The Calgary Roman Catholic Separate School Division will have an addition and modernization of the St. Martin de Porres High School, which is a grade 8 to 12, and that was their #1 on their capital list. The Red Deer School Division, Red Deer Public School Division, will have a modernization and addition for Hunting Hills High School, which is a 9 to 12 school. And this particular school had major issues with its roof that required mold mitigation, etc. There's a number of significant issues there, and it will actually add 200 additional spaces while ensuring that the health and safety issues are addressed. The Lethbridge School Division will get a new elementary in West Lethbridge. It'll be a K-5. Palliser School Division is a replacement and reconfiguration of Kate Andrews High School. Design only is for Peace River School Division, the solution for Manning, which is the K-12. The design for Horizon School Division, which is a solution for Milk River and the Earl River schools. It's a K-12. The Elk Island Catholic Separate School Division, new high school in Camrose, the 9 to 12, which I know you're very happy about. The Grand Prairie Yellowhead School Division, solution for Evansburg and Wildwood, is the K-12. Edmonton Catholic School Division, new high school in Castle Downs, Dunluce, which is a 10 to 12. And the Montgomery School Solution between Calgary Public and the Foundations for the Future Charter Academy is going forward as well. So many good things to report.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, I believe we're going back to Miss Lovely. Oh, no, sorry, Miss Hoffman. Apologies.
Yeah, no, thank you. I have to say that I too want to talk about the capital plan, and definitely don't feel that the introductory comments about there being schools for all parts of the province or all corners, I forget what the exact wording was, when public school parents in Edmonton definitely, I don't think, feel reflected in what was just announced earlier today. Edmonton Public. And last year, the government did bring forward a commitment that there would be planning money for a desperately needed Edmonton High School for Edmonton Public students. We know that we have seen how important it is to have physical distancing, especially during this time of a global public health pandemic, and we've had schools far over capacity for far too long. And the government last year seemed to acknowledge with the planning money that they would be moving forward with construction. And that definitely was what was said by folks from the Premier's office and others, was that this was good news and this was a step in the right direction. And I agreed at that time, because I assumed that the government, if you gave money to planning and you acknowledged that planning was desperately needed because schools are over capacity, that you were going to actually follow through and turn those plans into an actual building. And again, we have seen in Edmonton Public alone, I believe there are 4 schools, and I can provide the details later, where the majority of the students in those high schools are learning remotely right now instead of learning in person. And I would attest that at least part of that, from what parents have told me, is because they're concerned about the lack of physical distancing when it comes to school safety right now. And I appreciate that even in our debate here today, the rooms that both of us are in are bigger than most high school classrooms, and we've made concessions to ensure that we are distanced, that we are separated. And I personally, from a health and safety perspective, appreciate that. It is so important that we follow the rules of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, and I think that the same consideration should be given to students. And it isn't just for the period of the pandemic. We know that these high schools are desperately needed for Edmonton Public. And the fact that they've been completely shut out of this capital plan, I think, is very disrespectful to public school parents, students, and to staff as well. I am confident that I am going to have a whole slew of messages when I return home tonight to check in on what I missed in response to today's announcement, because I've already received some on my personal phone just in the last sort of 3 hours, I think, since the announcement. So I would say to Edmonton Public parents, and especially when it comes to the need for this high school, that the government appears to have written off Edmonton parents who choose public education. So I guess the question on that would be, does the minister agree? And if she disagrees, what in this budget is actually going to address the desperate capital high school needs for a public school in Edmonton? I also know that there are parents who desperately want a Catholic high school in Southeast Edmonton. And I see that there is one Catholic school that's being determined for North Edmonton. I know that that's been on their capital plan for quite some years. But I know that many South Side Catholic parents are going to be very disappointed in this budget as well. Because again, I've heard from many of them over the last year that they feel that this government has neglected the needs of South Edmonton families who want to choose Catholic education. So Edmonton Public families citywide, Edmonton Catholic families on the south side, I would say don't align with the values that the minister espoused at the beginning. So what too does she say to those families? And then, of course, I want to highlight the city of Calgary. I think it's pretty rich to put in CBE as in the news release when it's who's being paid for a school, but the school is indeed being given to somebody else. It's like saying PCL or somebody else in your news release when the beneficiary of that board is the ones that are receiving the school. So to the students in CBE who need a Calgary school in the city of Calgary, I think that this announcement today is a slap in the face, as well as the students from Calgary Catholic who reside within the city of Calgary. I know that there was a school that's governed by Calgary Catholic in Airdrie announced, but the city of Calgary, again, is not being respected. So Catholic and public parents in the city of Calgary, I think, are definitely being served a disservice by this announcement today and the budget that it flows from. Lastly, saying 14 new schools, and then when it's a mix of modernizations, buying out existing infrastructure that already exists, some planning money, I think is also a disrespect to the folks that language was projected.
Thank you. And before we head to the minister, I'm just going to remind all members to make sure that all of your questions are flowing through the chair. We were getting close there, but I didn't want to interrupt. And with that, Minister, the floor is yours for 5 minutes of response.
Well, thank you for the questions. And I as the member opposite knows, that obviously every school division puts forward a 3-year capital plan, and they always put forward their first, second, and thirds. And so requests number in the hundreds right across the province for new schools and modernizations. And the new projects that were chosen very much because of the metrics that are in place. And I just would be happy to read the metrics. We look at health and safety, enrollment pressures, functionality and programming, and building conditions. And so I really just want to, for everyone's sake, really go through the process that capital funding goes through. Our government is committed to building new schools, as I've said, and modernizing new ones. Each year, school jurisdictions submit their 3-year capital plans to Alberta Ed. The department then reviews the school board's capital plan submissions and develops a capital submission for government consideration. As part of this process, Alberta Education analyzes, evaluates, and prioritizes submissions and recommends the highest needs projects across the province. As I said earlier, the provincial priorities are determined using evaluation criteria that include and are related to the health and safety of students, enrollment pressures, functionality and programming, and building conditions. The evaluation criteria for each of these categories are applied to requests from all school jurisdictions, and each project is evaluated using these criteria to identify the level of need and the readiness for the project to proceed. Capital funding per student is not a criteria used to evaluate capital projects, and capital priorities included in Calgary Catholic's most recent 3-year capital plan have been carefully reviewed and considered during the development of Alberta Education's capital plan submission for budget 2021, along with the capital requests. And I know this is relevant because Calgary Catholic recently had a comparison of capital funding to other metros, and they really stressed that they felt the previous government disproportionately favored Edmonton in their funding decisions. What I can say is that there are many schools in flight in Calgary and in Edmonton right now. In Calgary alone, there are 10 projects, and in Edmonton, there are 12 active projects going forward. And those are either new builds or major modernizations. And so in Calgary right now, just for comparison, the last 10 years, since 2010, from 2010 to 2020, Calgary Catholic Separate School Division received 18 new projects, and the Calgary Board of Education received 38 new projects. The Catholic projects totaled $387 million, and the Calgary public projects totaled $923 million. In Edmonton, the Edmonton Catholic Separate School Division in that same decade received 19 projects totaling $417 million, and Edmonton Public School Division received 32 projects, and that totaled $863 million. Of course, I do have a detailed breakdown of all of those projects. Would be happy to share that and read that out to you. When we look at determining projects, as I said, they go through that very detailed process that the department follows, and we've really taken the politics out of these determinations and are really ensuring that the school builds are the ones that are most required and most needed, following that metrics of health and safety, enrollment pressure, functionality and programming, and building conditions. So when I look at all of the great announcements we made today, it certainly reflects the needs that were relevant and prevalent in those areas. No one can deny that, as I said earlier, Fort Vermilion went through a very tragic event, a terrible flooding that really required that school to be relocated. For the insurance dollars to say, yes, we'll pay you, but you have to rebuild in the same location just did not make sense to us. Why would we throw good money after bad? Why wouldn't we take this opportunity to move that school? And so I'm sure you agree with me that this was a necessity, that we actually do move that school off of the floodplain so that it no longer has to suffer.
Thank you, Minister. Appreciate that and glad to hear that Fort Vermilion is getting to move its school outside of a floodplain. I am very well aware of floodplains at this point. With that, we will go back to Miss Lovely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Minister, I'm still on cloud nine after hearing the announcement. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to go on about that for a little while. So the previous government had made promise of a Catholic school, and it didn't proceed with the design stage, which you've just announced today. So that's why my community is so very excited about this. I wanted to ask you, this process is not something that I'm familiar with. Is there opportunity for student input to be able to give their thoughts and ideas of what they would like to see in the school? Is that a component? I do have a student advisory panel that I meet with monthly, and that's probably one of the questions that I anticipate that they're going to be bringing forward. So I'd like to be able to answer that for them and share that good news with the community as well. And then going back to page 133 of the capital plan, it outlines that 14 new schools will be created within this budget from 2013 to 2019, when previous governments were in power. Many new schools have gone to the greater Edmonton area. And I'll just pause and say it's been quite a few years since we've had a new school in Camrose, but you made the announcement, actually the Premier came to Camrose and made the announcement last year that we are getting a new school, and I'm proud to say that construction has already started happening. It's very exciting. So that's with the Edmonton public school system in Battle River School Division has that school happening, and so it's very now balanced and fair that the Catholic school is being able to expand. And I've been to that school, and they are at over 100% capacity. They utilize every square inch of that building, so they are absolutely thrilled that this announcement has been made today. And so for budget 2021, what was the criteria used to select schools and ensure that schools were picked based on need and not politics? You had talked about that before, but if you could clarify a bit more for me. And then still on page 133 of the capital budget, Minister, it states of the $1.6 billion, $140 million is provided for the province's modular classroom program in budget 2021. An increase of $60 million in 2021-22, which allows for the strategic placement of modular classrooms. And just if you could clarify for me, Minister, the modular classroom, I've been out to Sedgwick and Killam, I visited all the schools, and just so I'm clear, a modular, are they the ones that are movable? And so I'm just wondering, some of the parents have asked me, why build a modular? Why not just build a school that's going to be the proper capacity to fit all the students and address that need? So if you could answer that question for me, that would be most helpful. And then, Minister, can you elaborate on what the modular classroom program is and how these modular classrooms will help students across the province? And so I think that it's my understanding that these modulars can be moved to a different school if the school suddenly has a decrease in capacity, or children graduate, and then you move that modular to another school, and it just makes sense to move that extra piece around. But that's my thinking. I don't know if I'm correct about this because education is not my background, but something that people do ask me about. So if you could clarify those things for me, I would be very grateful. And then also if we could get, I know you can't say for sure, but some sense of when construction would start, that would be great. And I think I'm at the end of my time, Madam Chair. I have 1 minute left. Okay, sorry, we didn't have the instructions for the fingers. So I'm going to carry on with just a few more questions here. And I want to know, Minister, what is the life expectancy of a modular? If you could clarify that, and how are they moved? So if there needs to be a modular that's moved one place to the other, does it stay within the school division, or does it move between school divisions? And does it move between systems? Can it move between a Catholic system and say, for instance, in my community, the Battle River School Division? I just want to have a very clear understanding of how the modulars work within our community. And then going back to design, just getting a better sense of how the design process will happen and who will be able to provide input for that.
Thank you, Ms. Lovely. And now on to the minister for 5 minutes of response.
Well, thank you so much. Great questions, and happy to answer them. Design stage, first and foremost, is really setting the trigger that we are going to move into, the next stage of being able to move forward on a new build or a major modernization. So oftentimes there isn't enough work already pre-done in terms of the location of the site, geological, the permits. There's a number of things that have to happen before you actually move to full build. And so triggering a design stage is particularly for very complex school builds. Typically high schools are more intricate. If there's a campus set up, that is also more intricate. So there's a number of factors that work into that, choosing a design stage. But it really is the first step moving towards a full build. So it is very, very important. And I apologize to MLA Hoffman that I missed answering a portion of her question. I can confirm that the South High School for Edmonton Public was indeed fully funded into the 2020 budget, the previous budget. So now moving on, I'm going to go to modulars next because I do want to call in my officials to really walk you through the gated process that we have in terms of choosing construction, and they deal with that on a day-to-day basis, and then they provide the recommendations forward. And it is very, very involved. So on the modular side, we have, again, as I said earlier, $140 million over 3 years. $90 million this year alone. It typically is about $25 million, but we have increased that to $90 million so that we can address more of the needs. Typically, we get about 400 requests a year. And the way it works is many of our new schools are built with a core school that is able to be expanded as the community grows. Obviously, new communities, as they add more households, there's more children, they're younger ages, they attend that school. But oftentimes, as the community ages, it starts to shrink and there's less students attending. So it makes sense to build a core school and add more classrooms as necessary. And then consequently, also, as that community shrinks, that they're able to remove those classrooms and move them. As you said, they are movable. Oftentimes they were called portables because we do move them from site to site where they're most needed. And so the life expectancy of the average modular, and I have to tell you, they have advanced so much in the last decade to 2 decades. They're very complex buildings. Most often you wouldn't even recognize that they're not part of the original school build. They have a life expectancy of about 25 to 30 years, and they can be moved. They are often moved between schools within a school division and sometimes even between school divisions. They typically cost about $250,000 per modular. Including the move. But again, that is dependent on what the size is and where it's moving to, et cetera. So school divisions really value having modulars and being able to access those modulars because it does really increase the capacity of their schools without having to go to full builds, particularly when there's only been incremental increases, slight incremental increases year over year. When we get to the actual, the determination of a capital build, as I said earlier, there's the 3-year capital plan that every school division goes through. They provide it to the ministry. And I'd like to call on Paul Lamoureux to come forward and or Jeff Willen, whoever is going to come forward, to explain how that gated process works. And if you could just introduce yourself. Please. And I do believe, Jeff, you have to come to the the main microphone, sorry. There's only one other live microphone, which is this one.
There's about 30 seconds.
Jeff Willen, Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic Services and Governance in Alberta Education. And so there are actually 10 gates with respect to the gated approval process that the capital planning submissions go through before they end up being approved for funding by the Government of Alberta. And before those gates start, there is the pre-submission phase. So this is often where the work between the department and a
Apologies, we weren't fast enough getting to the mic, I guess. And with that, we go back to the official opposition, and Ms. Hoffman has the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and through you, I will ask all of my questions as they relate, again, in this round to capital, because I believe that the minister said that, that she's turning a new path in this budget and that announcements won't be that announcements will be based on objective criteria, which I believe that they have always had a manual that was objective criteria. And I'd say that a significant piece of that has been highlighted. I know that the minister talked through the examples for Calgary, 18 schools for the Catholic Board, Edmonton 19, and Calgary Public 38, Edmonton Public 32 during the timelines that she used. So when she was talking about things being unfair or disproportionate, I would say that proportionate to the number of residents who identify as being part of each of those jurisdictions. The other piece, of course, that many people have found highly offensive under former Conservative governments, and I fear that those will be some of the messages I hear tonight, are that our big cities are being disadvantaged and taken for granted under this government. So one question would be, is the minister implying that her previous two capital plans were politically motivated and that's changing with her new one? Because that's sort of what I heard at the beginning. That'll be one point. The second point is, doesn't the minister feel it's disingenuous to say that it's a Calgary public school when it's indeed a charter school that's being built in Calgary in her news release? Thirdly, I appreciate that you highlighted that an Edmonton Public Southeast school, but I also was asking about Edmonton Catholic. I've heard from many Edmonton Catholic parents, and that was the specific question I had about Southeast Edmonton, was around parents wanting to be able to choose within the city that they live in, and ideally a reasonable ride time, a school that isn't overcrowded, a school that's safe, and a school that is able to offer the programming they want from the school authority that they identify with. It's that time of year right now where parents contact me saying that they've been denied entry to a public school in their neighborhood because neither of the parents are public, both of the parents are Catholic, rather. And I know that that's incredibly difficult for many, many families when they want to choose a school that's closest to their home. And the same happens in the inverse often too, where parents who don't identify as Catholic won't have their child admitted to the Catholic school that's in the neighborhood because that's the way the legislation's written. And if we are to follow the spirit of the legislation, I would say it would be incumbent upon us, and you especially through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister, to ensure that you are building for the choices that parents want to make. And I will say, as somebody who's been in Edmonton now for over 20 years, parents feel very strongly and are very supportive of the choices that are available to them. Primarily, parents in Edmonton choose public and Catholic education. And I think they deserve to have the ability to make both of those choices in our city. Because the legislation requires that if the parents are of one particular faith, that's where their children will go. Or if they aren't of that particular faith, then they go to the public system. So I think to say, even through the titling of bills, that this government supports school choice, when it appears that through today's announcement, certain options are being pushed on communities more than others, is, I would say, disrespectful to the parents who feel slighted by today's announcement. I know that there are absolutely benefits for having portables. We've had to ask for them many times when I was on Edmonton Publics, and I imagine the minister had to ask for them when she was on Red Deer Catholics Board. But always it's best to be able to have an appropriately sized school for the neighborhood that you're in, and to be able to meet the needs of the local community and the catchment zone. So while portables are necessary, I think many parents would find it frustrating to see that there's more money for portables in this announcement today than there is for schools in Calgary. We've seen how full attendance lists are, and I'd be happy for the minister to talk about capacity and which schools have exceeded capacity in Calgary, because the last time I pulled it, I think that we had several in both the public and the Catholic board within the city of Calgary, and again, not one announcement today to help address or alleviate any of that pressure and stress that families are feeling. So to say that the politics have been taken out when most people that have reached out to me so far have said they feel the politics are heightened.
Thank you. And now we move on to the minister for 5 minutes of reply.
Thank you for those questions. And I'm very happy to reply to those questions. And in fact, I'll start by prefacing by saying that when I first became Minister of Education, there was a narrative out there that decisions were made on politics, and I felt very strongly that we needed to correct that narrative. And so we have, through this gated process, we've really tightened it up. And I really would like to provide Jeff the opportunity to discuss how these we've been able to tighten that up so that we are making decisions on need and on the metrics that I've already indicated of health and safety, enrollment pressure, punctuality and programming, and building conditions. And I'm so glad to hear that the member opposite really feels strongly about the choice in education, that she's supportive of the excellent choices that we have in Alberta. We have a long, proud history of successful education in choice, and so we do have public, Catholic, Francophone, we have charter schools, we have independent schools, and we also have homeschooling. And so that choice needs to be supported, and we have committed to supporting it. Over the years, we've made announcement over the last number of years for both Edmonton Public, Edmonton Catholic, Calgary Catholic, and Calgary Public, as well as all of the other school divisions on a as per needed basis. And of course, that was all done objectively through the gated process. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to explain that gated process in full.
Again, Jeff Willen with Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic Services and Government within Alberta Education. Thank you, Minister, for the opportunity to respond. So I will pick back up at the beginning of the gated process. So
Excuse
there are
me.
10 gates.
Could I just ask you to remove your mask? It's really hard to hear you in here. There we go.
Sorry about that. So there are 10 gates, and so before the gated process begins, there is the pre-submission phase. So at this phase, this is where the department has officials that are working closely with school divisions across the province to work on what their priority needs are. And as the minister alluded to earlier, school boards submit a 3-year capital plan. So in the construction of that capital plan, there is ongoing work throughout the year with Alberta Education Department officials. And so there's considerable work back and forth that goes over with respect to the need, the prioritization that the board may feel with respect to what their capital needs are, whether they are something that's related to, as the minister has already pointed out, it could be health related, it could be in relation to building condition, it may also be related to enrollment pressures, things like that. So there's a lot of dialogue between the department and the school board before a school board, in fact, submits a board chair signed submission to the department for consideration in the annual 3-year capital planning process. So that then gets us to phase 1, which is where we're doing the data gathering and review. So as 61 school divisions submit their capital plan requests, the department then begins to evaluate those ones that are prioritized by the boards. And as Minister also alluded to, often they have them ranked from numerical 1, perhaps down to numerical 3, maybe 5, 7, 10, depending on their preference. So within the department now, there's a lot of analysis to ensure that the submission is complete. So we need to ensure that we understand what the enrollment, if it's an enrollment pressure one, what are the enrollment pressures related to the need for additional space? So that might be because it's a new neighborhood that's going up. So what are the census projections for populating that community? It may also be looking at where are the feeder schools. So when we're talking about high schools, one of the things we're often looking for is what are the feeder schools looking like with respect to their population that may then be feeding into this proposed high school solution that a school division may be bringing forward. So at this stage, we will go through that and ensure that all of the submissions are complete. And then it goes into a further review within the department. So gates 2 and 3 speak to evaluation. So when we're doing evaluation, we are looking again at a certain level of completeness. And then of course, whether or not the sector evaluation and the analytics and metrics that require that we look at the need for a capital project has been met. So we look through those things for the next 2 gates within the department. As we progress through that, then we go into what we call as a scoring gate. And that scoring metric looks at things like, again, we weight building condition, health and safety.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that fulsome response. And with that, we will move over to MLA Horner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister and your staff. I wasn't in the first round of estimates in education, but it's a pleasure to be here for the afternoon on such an important ministry. And I'll try to continue with MLA Lovely's excitement over a new school. I'm excited for it. I've met some of those people, and they're very deserving. I just wanted to make a comment before I ask you some questions also on the capital plan. But you know, in ridings like mine, where there's not a lot of enrollment pressure, you still see the excitement over the need. So I don't think it's helpful to say that a replacement school or a modernization isn't quite as exciting or as important, because for those communities, I can tell you it's just like a new school. Whether it's because there's straw sticking out of the walls for insulation or mold, it's there because of that the build is happening because of the objective metrics you outlined. And I know my community's still very excited over the Morin School that was announced in 2019. And I believe, if I recall the number right, there's 63 schools being built across the province in various stages. And I know I have 2 that were announced previously by the former government. And I'm very proud of those schools as well. Provost and Delia, yes. Very proud of those schools as well, and glad that we've continued with those builds, because they're very necessary and important as well. So if I could, on the capital plan on page 136, obvious that there's an increase of $133 million, and I just wondered if you could dive into that and explain what that's going to mean for your ministry and for the school authorities across the province. How that will change the scale and scope of what they're able to do. And then I would also like to break into something that areas like mine probably do know a little more than new schools: infrastructure, maintenance, and renewal. On page 137 of the capital plan, I would say that we see that you plan to spend an increase of 119 million on school facilities. That would be on top of the 250 million that you would have front-loaded to school authorities this last spring. So I also wonder if you could comment on that, Minister, just what sort of things school authorities will be able to build with these dollars, how it will help them keep them up. I know in speaking to my counselors and superintendents, you know, there's never a shortage of the HVAC systems, you know, the leaky roofs, the crumbling foundations. It seems like there's no shortage of places for those dollars to go. So just wondered if you could comment on those 2 things, so on 136 and 137 of the capital plan. Thank you, Minister. I'll cede, there's some time. I'll cede to Brad. I'll cede my time to Brad Rutherford to fill it with another question before flipping to you, Minister, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Minute and 30 seconds.
Sure. Thank you, MLA Horner. And I appreciate as well today, Minister, the announcement of new schools and design funding as well. I was the beneficiary in this riding of Leduc Beaumont not that long ago of funding for a new high school in Leduc and a francophone school in Beaumont for K to 12. Which has been long sought after for the community here in Beaumont. They had taken quite a bit of time to run me through the day-to-days at their school, St. Vital. And I remember, Minister, we had a couple meetings on it where we went over the need, and I was very appreciative of getting the school as well out in my riding. And you had made some comments earlier around the curriculum, and I really appreciated that you spoke about the inclusion of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit history and education up into the new curriculum, and I think that that's quite important. It wasn't that long ago that one of my constituents, Don Miller, had invited me to a blanket exercise in Leduc, and Don's been a great resource for everything education.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. And now to the Minister for 5 minutes of response.
Great. Thank you for all those great questions. And just let me start by making myself clear. And I'm sorry if MLA Hoffman was confused by my words. We have used the gated objective process since I have become Minister of Education. So just to clarify that in case there was any further confusion. So as MLA Horner did indicate, schools are community hubs, and particularly in rural communities. You cannot underestimate the value of a school in the rural community. It really gathers everyone together. It's the meeting place. It is often multi-purposed for other usages. Oftentimes there's, other events, whether it's 4-H or whatever, utilize some of the space. The gymnasium is often in constant use. And so it's very important to have good quality schools in our rural communities. And unfortunately, over the years, many of our rural schools, of course, the older ones in particular, have deteriorated and have become health and safety issues. And when I toured across the province, I was able to go, to the four corners of the province and see that there were many needs and many demands in this area, that there were schools that were really in rough shape and that we needed to do something about it. And certainly going through the process, that gated process that was earlier mentioned was very valuable in addressing those. So the one question in terms of the $136 million of capital that will be, $133 million of capital on page 136. We are, again, really looking at investing in planning for the future, maintaining and enhancing our existing schools and building new schools. It's so critical that we continue to do this, and we're committed to doing this to the tune of $2.1 billion spread out over 3 years. These projects create construction jobs in the communities they're built. Those construction workers stay in hotels, they eat in our restaurants, and they spend money in those communities. They are economic hubs when those schools are being built. So it is very, very important that we remember that as well. Also, contractors hire local workers in these communities, and that's also a bonus for those communities as they continue to see that infrastructure being built. And oftentimes it's just a nice shot in the arm for those communities to really have that ability to once again gather in their school. Long, proud histories. School divisions have long, proud histories, and I know most people recognize that schools in Alberta have been around for over 170 years. So many, many things to celebrate. On page 137 was also mentioned the spending of $119 million on infrastructure maintenance and renewal projects in 2021, which was on top of the $250 million in accelerated IMR funding. This was in the midst of the pandemic. We provided school divisions with $250 million to accelerate hundreds of much needed upgrades to schools and create thousands of jobs. The program was structured as an accelerated program where we brought forward dollars from future years so that they could be spent now when they were needed the most. And this was great news for the staff and students who have benefited from healthy and safe learning environments, as many projects moved forward earlier than they would have otherwise. And I know many schools took this opportunity to drive COVID-related projects, such as HVAC and ventilation system upgrades. They also looked at boiler upgrades. They did replacements of sinks and door openings to make them remoteless, and these were all very beneficial, especially when we were in a pandemic. So this funding envelope is important no matter when we provide it. Investment in maintenance and renewal of school infrastructure ensures healthy and comfortable learning environments for our students. This work extends the useful life of existing school buildings and reduces the need for replacement in the future. And I had many school divisions tell me that this actually made an impact on their insurance as well, because these schools were now in a better safety position, so they were able to get better rates in some instances, as well as not having to wait that extended period of time to address much needed issues. So funding invested in maintaining schools directly impacts their lifespan and maintains their long-term value. When you mentioned the First Nations Métis Inuit students, that is one of our key areas that we are looking at to ensure that our First Nations Métis Inuit students do.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we go back to the NDP caucus and Ms. Hoffman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I definitely will want to talk about capital again a little bit later, or I'm sure some of my colleagues will, but at this point I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about curriculum as it does relate to Business Plan Key Objective 1.1, implementing new curriculum, including a validation process with volunteer school authorities to gather feedback. And I think for anyone who's been involved in education, when there's been a curriculum update of even a smaller scale, I remember when I was training to be a teacher was when math had just been updated, and even then we knew that there was significant cost related with the rollout of new curriculum. Of course, resources are one thing people often think about, textbooks and other tools that directly align being a large upfront cost, but also I would assert that adequate professional development and support for our educational experts needs to be a priority if we want to ensure that we get curriculum rollout done properly. I understand that it is voluntary for this first year, and that voluntary in terms of not everyone needs to sign on for all of it, even by school authority, right? I think there's going to be some flexibility on that, so be helpful if the minister could elaborate on that. But there will be upfront costs, there always are, and especially with something of this scale. K-4 is a substantial period of a child's educational experience. So I was part of some education consultations that we did recently on this, or budget consultations in general, actually. It felt like education consultations because there are a lot of people who came to ask education questions. They care deeply about ensuring that we get the K-12 system properly supported so that we can see success for all students. And Barb and Dave specifically asked me about the lack of support when it came to implementation for curriculum. Dave worked in the education system and supported other curriculum rollouts in the past, and he said in his experience there was always a dedicated line item to ensure that it was done in a way that was supported and systematic, and that it wasn't just have schools versus have not schools, that we need to make sure that we keep universality as one of the drivers in our public education system. So there doesn't appear to be any increased investment when it comes to the rollout of curriculum in this budget or the out years either. So we want to make sure, again, that we're not asking schools that are already going to see 20,000 more students, that are already going to see more than 2,000 fewer educational staff there to support them, whether it's certified or non-certified, certificated or non-certificated rather. Is the minister asking school authorities to continue to do more without giving them adequate funding to actually support them on the implementation of this? Or is minister hoping that magically Google Docs can create curriculum and implement the resources and supports properly across the province, because I don't think that is a fair ask to put on our school staff. Ministers probably heard from teachers who've been, as they like to refer to as June tired, since about the third week of September. This has been an exhausting year. And schools are continuing to see requirements around isolation and other pressures that add to the anxiety and stress that staff, students, and families experience this year. So asking teaching staff to give up time that they're going to need over the summer to be able to recover and focus and hone their own skills, to learn a new curriculum and acquire additional content to be able to support the implementation of that curriculum, I think is too much to ask right now for our educational staff who are working in schools. I think that the government really needs to step up and put some focus and priority on making sure, through you, Madam Chair, that our school staff are getting the adequate support to be able to implement and support the new curriculum as it moves forward. So Barb and Dave asked that question. I promised them that I would ask it on their behalf. Many others have asked similar questions, but they specifically were very passionate about this, and I believe that they're both retired at this point, but their question was essentially, how are we possibly going to do this effectively with no new money? Professional development resources, assessment supports is another one, textbooks, it all costs money, and I know that assessment is something that the minister has been prioritizing in this budget, but we need far more than provincial achievement tests to assess the effectiveness of curriculum of this scale. Thank you. 10 seconds.
Perfect. You've got 7 seconds left, so that's wonderful. And we will go to the minister for 5 minutes of reply.
Great. Thank you so much for those questions. And you're absolutely right. Curriculum is integral to the education system. And that is why, and we absolutely realize the significance of being in a pandemic, and that there have been many pressures on school teachers and administrators and the whole system, and really want to acknowledge the tremendous work they've been doing and continue to do. And I have heard from many teachers that are actually excited about piloting the new curriculum. And so that's why we felt very strongly that we needed to make it voluntary, that those who are feeling the pressure that it would be too much, that they do not need to put their names forward, but certainly those that are excited and able to and wanting to, that they would indeed have the opportunity to pilot either the whole curriculum or a subject or a grade. And so certainly that flexibility is something that we heard the system was very appreciative of, and we will look when we are able to put the curriculum out publicly to find out who is able and willing to move that forward in the validation stage. And you are absolutely correct that professional development and resources are all critical to the curriculum, and I have committed all along that we want this curriculum to be successful and that it will require resources and professional development. And the other commitment that I've made is that we will provide those resources, we will provide that professional development, but it will not come out of classroom funding. It will not come out of the funding that is allotted to school divisions. So it will be coming out of my budget, and I will expand upon that once we release the curriculum in the near future. So again, going back to the development of the curriculum, I'm happy to say that the new provincial K-12 curriculum went through a very extensive process of drafting and refining. As I said earlier, we had to align the new ministerial order on student learning, and then we had to revise the guide to education, and then it has gone through many stages. And through every stage that it has gone through, it has continued to be further refined and come out a stronger curriculum. In December of 2020, the K-6 Curriculum Working Group reviewed the draft of the curriculum. The group was composed of teachers, current teachers, who, based on their knowledge and discipline, knowledge of their particular discipline, subject knowledge matter, classroom perspective, were able to provide us additional feedback that has gone into making this K-6 draft even better. As I indicated earlier today, and I believe I've answered this several times, we also had the deans of education and some of their faculty staff also provide feedback. This has been such a great process to ensure that when we do have this draft that will be going public shortly, that it is the best possible draft. But we know it is not finished. We know it has to go to that validation stage when the teacher in the classroom has the curriculum and is able to implement it. They will be able to tell us on content load. They will be able to tell us a number of things, and we will be able to further refine it. And I know the public is going to want to weigh in, and I hope they do. I hope every single citizen of Alberta who wants to has an opportunity to see it. It will be made public. It will be on our website. I encourage them to look at it and give us their feedback so that we can make it even better. And the final version of the draft K-6 curriculum that will be implemented across the province won't be finalized until 2022. So there's so much time for everyone to provide their valuable feedback. We'll take that and we will make it even better. So in 2022, I anticipate that we will have the best curriculum possible to put before our students. As I said earlier, I anticipate through the validation phase that there will be approximately 10% of schools participating. And I really do look forward to hearing their comments. We are committed to making this a successful implementation, and that will take resources. It will take professional development, and we are going to do that. I've committed to it.
Thank you, Minister. Appreciate that response. And with that, we go back to the Government Caucus, and I believe we have Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad, Minister, that you started going over how the curriculum was developed. I found that it was an in-depth process, clearly laid out on the alberta.ca website, the steps that were going to be taken. So I thought that was quite open and transparent. And although some people won't treat the draft as such, I'm glad to hear that feedback will still be coming in from parents and teachers and all sources, and that's going to be taken seriously as well. As I was finishing my last comments in the last block, I was talking about how much I appreciated that there was an inclusion of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit education, and the importance of that, because I can see in outcome 2 in your key objectives a number of items listed out that touch on that as well, and so I am looking forward to seeing the content within the curriculum. Over the last year and a half, especially around the pandemic, and since I've been elected, I've tried to build a good relationship with the superintendents, the chairs, and trustees in my riding. So some of the feedback that I get from them is coming into this question. I know it was touched on earlier, but I just wanted to make sure that we've got a full and fulsome answer around it. And so that's going to be around page 102 of the fiscal plan, around the weighted moving average. And so on page 102, it discusses the WMA and the use of a new funding assurance model. So I just wondering if you make sure that you can outline, really clearly the changes in the new funding assurance model. And then second, given that this, of course, was an unprecedented year, with much lower enrollment than usual, how did the implementation of the weighted moving average affect school authorities? And so I had questions early on from school boards and other folks and stakeholders around questions about that on the moving average. How was it going to be treated in the upcoming year? How it was going to affect funding? And I hope that you can elaborate on that and just really give a concise picture of what they can expect. And so with that, Madam Chair, I will turn it over to the next member to ask a question as well before we get an answer back from the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford, and I see Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the Minister. I want to thank the Minister for being here this afternoon. You know, I was looking around and you can't really see us here in the conference room this afternoon, but I'm looking at the honourable member from Edmonton Calder and the honourable member from Highlands Norwood and yourself and myself, and we all have extensive education backgrounds, and and yourself as well. and you know, I was just thinking that, boy, this almost sounds to me like it's a staff meeting, and here we have our commander-in-chief here outlining for us where we're going to go as in the upcoming school year. So it just sort of takes me back a little bit to my 30 years as a teacher, and I've appreciated that. I want to spend some time talking a little bit about the weighted moving average, and I know that it's a relatively new formula that we've had, I think, just about a year under our belts with it now. And the feedback that I'm getting from it, from my school boards and from principals and from superintendents has been relatively positive. You know, as a rural MLA, I know that many of the rural school boards across this province have struggled with maintaining their populations, and that weighted moving average tends to allow them to sort of weigh out the pain of a declining population. But I don't really want to focus on that right now. I want to focus and I want to draw your attention to page 102. Of your fiscal plan, and about when you talk about the weighted moving average. And we know that not all school divisions and not all schools across this province have had a declining enrollment. Matter of fact, for some, they've actually seen their enrollments grow, and sometimes significantly. And so you know, I can think of one, small independent schools that has seen their...
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And with that, we will go to Minister LaGrange for 5 minutes of response.
Great, thank you. Again, wonderful questions. And I think I'll go back to MLA, oh goodness, it's been a long day. MLA Rutherford, and I apologize. But I really feel I want to expand. I didn't get quite a chance to speak to our key strategies that we're using to support our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students. And so I want to give you examples of some of the things that we're doing to really support our students in this area. So we are establishing collaborative partnerships with the First Nations and Métis communities. We are supporting school authorities to build relationships and engage with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit parents and families. It's critical to get the families involved. Developing culturally relevant learning resources and program supports. We are creating a curriculum that has a strong focus on Canadian history, including issues related to histories, cultures, and the contributions of Indigenous peoples in Alberta and in Canada. We're increasing the number of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit professionals within our education workforce. That's also critical so that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students can have role models to look up to. Providing supports to First Nations education authorities to establish additional programs and supports such as teacher professional development and student wellness programming. We're providing professional learning in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit education to ensure that all students, teachers, and school leaders learn about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit perspectives and experiences, treaties, and the history and legacy of residential schools. Another critical aspect that you will see prevalent within our curriculum. Providing assurance for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit education funding, including support for provincial school authorities in engaging with the communities, planning, performance measures, and reporting. We're collecting and analyzing research and data on First Nations, Métis, and Inuit education to support evidence-based policy and program decisions. We are leading the development and implementation of data sharing and agreements with the First Nations education authorities. And I could go on and on because it is really critical that we address the needs of First Nations students. When you look at the weighted moving average, I appreciate all of the questions that were gathered. When we were going around the province on our very extensive engagement at looking at the funding model, we certainly heard from school divisions, and I know many of the members there today would have heard this over and over again. What school authorities were looking for were sustainable, predictable funding. And as you both members that asked questions indicated, I draw your attention back to the fiscal plan, and on page 103 of the fiscal plan, when you look at the student enrollment growth, a historical perspective, 15-year perspective, you can see that while enrollment and inflation grew, the operational expenses grew exponentially more. And that was something that was not sustainable. So what we did here was to develop a model that would give that sustainable, predictable funding that would even out the highs and the lows of enrollment growth and enrollment decline. And that's certainly what is achieved in the new model. And we have committed, as you indicated, MLA Smith, that this is the first year of the model. And so we have been committed to refining it, and we have been doing that. We listen to the partners. We hear their concerns when they have concerns. We appreciate the constructive feedback, and then we adjust. So under the funding model, the new funding model, it frees up resources by reducing red tape and administrative costs, while giving school boards the autonomy and the flexibility to invest in classrooms based on student need. Apart from the cap on system administration, none of the grants in the new model are targeted, so school authorities have maximum flexibility to allocate their resources to best meet the needs of their students. It's an efficient and sustainable funding model for K-12 education, which ensures all schools in Alberta have adequate resources to deliver programs in an equitable way. The previous funding model wasn't flexible enough to contain costs and involved too much administration. As I said earlier, it was just not sustainable. So this predictable funding model allows authorities to do better long-term planning by making more informed budget decisions well ahead of the start of a school year. And that was also something very critical. And I've said it over and over.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we go to Member Irwin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to pick up on where my colleague, the member from Edmonton-Glenora, left off. And, I just want to echo my concerns. The fact that you've not allocated additional funds for curriculum implementation has me quite concerned that students all across the province will have less access to critical resources. And I know from my time working at Alberta Education and from the large volumes of research that I went through in that role that some of the key elements needed for successful curriculum implementation are resources and professional development. And, mark my words, without any additional funding for these two areas, there will not be successful implementation. So how are you exactly planning to address this? And you cannot simply expect school boards that are facing already tight budgets to absorb these costs. And if you are, it is students who will suffer. I noticed you did mention a few minutes ago that the money is going to come from somewhere. So I would like some clarity on that. Where is that? If it's not in the budget this year, which we don't see that it is, then does that mean that implementation is therefore delayed? Would like some clarity on that. Relevant to implementation, page 31 of your business plan, is something that's been top of mind for me and that I've raised in the legislature a couple of times, and that's the pending closure of the Alberta Distance Learning Centre, the ADLC, at the end of this year. We know that the ADLC has been providing high quality resources and learning opportunities to students all across this province for over 100 years, in fact. And students in all areas of Alberta will be impacted, but as we know, rural and remote schools and boards in particular very much relied on ADLC supports. So I would just love to hear from you. What is your plan to fill the large gaps that will be left when ADLC closes, when there doesn't appear to be any additional funding allocated? So I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that, and I know a number of folks have reached out to myself and my colleague from Edmonton-Glenora on that. I'd like to shift gears to page 29 of your business plan, where it notes that the ministry charts the course for the education system and oversees the administration of safe, caring, and inclusive education programs and services. Now, what's intriguing to me and to my colleagues is that the terms safe and caring appear here once, but they do not appear anywhere else. And we know from previous business plans, in fact, even your own business plan last year, that there were performance metrics tied to safe, caring, and healthy learning environments. And I did pick up on the fact that you even mentioned safe and caring environments earlier in your comments. So given that, why isn't this a priority for measurement? Why have those metrics been removed? I have to wonder, how can you possibly assure schools, staff, and most importantly students that there will be safe and caring learning environments for them if you have no way of tracking and no way of measuring it? And we can talk specifically about supports for students to make this tangible. As an example, we know that Bill 8 has had a chilling effect. The Bill 8 introduced in 2019, it's had a chilling effect on students and staff, not just those who identify as members of the LGBTQ2S+ community, but allies as well. And I have to tell you, Minister, over the last number of months, but even recently, I've had conversations with students and staff from all parts of this province who don't feel safe at school right now, don't feel like there's an opportunity to be themselves. From staff who've, through the chair, respectfully, from staff who've, experienced barriers in trying to set up gay straight alliances and queer straight alliances in their schools, as well for staff gay straight alliances. And so, I wonder the message that this sends to those students and to the greater community when you've removed references to safe and caring. And I have to give another example. Racialized students. Racism, we know, is on the rise across our province. Racialized students report high levels of bullying in our schools. And again, at a time when we should be providing greater supports for students and ensuring that we're offering safe, anti-racist school environments. What is the message that your ministry is sending to those students? So again, I'm really looking forward to hearing your answers on curriculum implementation, on the ADLC, as well as on safe and caring schools.
Thank you, and I will just give a quick reminder to make sure that we try and tie our questions to the estimates that are at hand, so either a line in the budget or a business plan. And with that, I will pass it over to the minister for 5 minutes of response, and then we will be going to 5 minutes of question.
Thank you. And I do believe I've addressed the curriculum development over and over again, but I'm happy to again inform you that when I release the curriculum, when it goes to the public here in the near future, that details on the funding will be made clear. But suffice to know that it is not coming out of school board funds or school division funds, that it will not come out of the classroom, and that we are committed to having a successful implementation process involving both resources and professional development. And with that, I'll move to ADLC, and the Alberta Distance Learning was something that at one point was the only system for providing online supports for students. When we went around the province, and there was a very thorough engagement across the province of all school authorities and education partners to talk about the new funding model, we heard very loudly, very clearly that there were over 30 school divisions. I believe it was 32 at the time, and I know that number has increased even more in the pandemic, that were providing online programming. And so they felt that they were being disadvantaged in comparison to ADLC in terms of the funding. And so they felt very much that there were alternatives, and we spoke about choice and the value of choice, and that school students should have that choice. So they were very clear that that we needed to change the model. because there were so many providing online programming to students and distance learning to students. And of course, through the pandemic, many more school divisions have stepped up and have provided distance learning through necessity to their students. And if they were not capable of or did not have the capacity, they have partnered with other school divisions to provide that to their students. For ADLC, felt very strongly that we wanted to give them the opportunity to transition to that particular school division who oversaw ADLC. So we provided 2 years of funding for that school division. They made the choice to only accept the 1 year of additional funding and to cease operations in this upcoming 21-22 years. So that was the decision that was made by that board in particular. When we talk about safe and caring schools and programs, absolutely it is critical that our schools do follow that metric of safe and caring. As I had indicated earlier, in the business plan, we were restricted to only being able to provide X number of space metrics, but we will have full metrics on our online very, very shortly, including all of the items that Member Irwin has indicated. And I really want to say that, boards have policies in place, and they are very robust policies. It is under the Education Act that they have to have safe and caring school policies. They have to have anti-bullying policies. They're very diligent about ensuring that those policies are followed. They really, we have the inclusion groups are also mentioned in our Education Act, and again that they are followed. There are steps to follow, and we see that. And I wish I had a copy of it here, but I know that you can find it online on our website on the accountability pillar results. And the accountability pillar results are surveys that are done across the whole education system. And the last survey results that were done show that we've actually increased significantly. We've gone into the blue on the safe and caring, and those are metrics, surveys done with teachers, with students, and with parents. And so that is something that, and I've just got the numbers. Currently, we're at 89.4%. The previous year was 89%. And those of you who follow these metrics know that any small percent increase is really significant. That was 264,000 respondents. Parents, teachers, and students all feel that we are in an excellent position in terms of our safe and caring school policies. But from my perspective, until that number is 100%, it's not good enough. So we're always going to strive to get that 100% of students, parents, and teachers feeling that all our schools are safe and caring environments.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we will have a quick 5-minute break. I see that the time is 4:57, so we will come back at 5:03 on the dot. fantastic. It is 5:03, and with that, we are returning from our break. And we are going next to MLA Smith. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, you know, we're hitting the home stretch here there, Minister. What is it, an hour and a half left out of the 6-hour time limit that we've got? And one of the other members mentioned earlier that there's June tired, so I don't know what you want to call it right now, but buckle up, grab a cup of coffee, and let's get at it again, okay? We started talking before in the last round that we had about the weighted moving average. And generally, I've heard some really, really good things about the weighted moving average, especially for the school divisions that have tended to see a shrinking population, especially in the rural areas. But I want to focus a little bit of our time today on school divisions that have seen some growth, and how the weighting moving average is going to impact them. And basically the question that I'm going to be asking, although I want to elaborate it on a little bit, is how will the weighted moving average address the scenario of a rising school board population? So that's the question that I want you to consider. And it's related to page 102 of your fiscal plan. But I want to set the stage for this question by talking a little bit about some of the independent schools that have contacted me and have seen their populations grow, not hugely, but 10, 20, 25 students. And when you're a small independent school, that 20 or 25 students can make a huge difference in your hiring and in how you're going to roll out the school year and how you're going to meet your students' needs. And so I want you to consider talking a little bit about how that weighted moving average is going to impact the smaller school divisions, because we know that the larger school boards, an increase of even several hundred students can sometimes just get washed out in the largeness of all of the students that they have. But for a small school board, that's not the way it works. That increase can significantly impact them, and that weighted moving average is going to significantly impact them, like it wouldn't for one of the big four metro boards. So I guess, could you spend some time today talking to us about how the weighted moving average will address the scenario of a school board that's growing? And I'd like you to consider, and this question that I don't really understand myself very clearly, would that be affecting home school authorities as well? Because I know that there's a significant number of home school authorities that in this COVID era, as parents have been choosing to have a education delivered as more of a Zoom and a computer-driven exercise. Will that affect the weighted moving average? Will it affect your home school authorities that have seen significant growth in their schools' populations? So I don't know if that's stretching this. You might have to explain for us a little bit how that weighted moving average works and how it would impact. Not because I know that there's a formula in there somewhere that talks about the percentage of how great the percentage is for growth in those school boards and how that will affect. So if you could address those for myself and for the people of Alberta, I think it would bring some clarity to a situation, because some of these school boards are reaching out to us as MLAs, and they are coming to us and saying, how is that impacting us? Because we're not sure we understand. It's only been 1 year that we've had the weighted moving average. So some questions along that line as we sort of work our way into an understanding of how that goes is pretty understandable, but it's something that I think we need to address. So lastly, again, how will the weighted moving moving weighted average address the scenario of a school authority or a school board's rising population? Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. Great questions, and certainly, something that we consider more often than not when you're in a rural community. It is a declining or enrollment that they're dealing with, or shrinking enrollment, and the weighted moving average. The whole factor around the weighted moving average in the funding formula is that it evens out the bumps, as I said earlier. So for those that are shrinking or declining, it will soften the blow in terms of the number of students. Before, when it was on a per student basis, it actually, if you had even one or two students leave, it was significant, particularly for smaller school authorities. Whereas now, when one or two students leave, those are evened out because it's spread over 3 years. And I can go into exactly how that is determined. But I did want to address, before I forget, the homeschool question that you did ask. And so homeschool parents and school authorities are funded on a per student basis because they only do receive $1,700 per student. Now that is an increase in the new funding model from $1,650 to $1,700 per student. $850 is to the parents, and $850 goes to the supervising board. So a weighted moving average on this amount, which is considerably less than when a student is in the school system, bricks and mortar school, is certainly something that we did not want to disadvantage those parents. So we actually did increase it marginally from $1,650 to $1,700. So that is not affected by the weighted moving average. The results that we've seen on the weighted moving average approach is particularly evident through COVID-19, as many school boards did experience significant decrease in enrollment, especially in the non-mandatory programming of pre-kindergarten and kindergarten programs. As I said earlier, when I indicated the numbers and the fact that we're still continuing to fund all school divisions, because that's very, very important that they have those funds available. And I also indicated that in budget 2021, we're going to provide $130 million in provincial mitigation funding, which will allow our school authorities to support that safe learning environment for all of our students. You did ask about those that are seeing growth. And again, where you see growth, particularly if it's just a small number of students, that bump is evened out because we are taking previous year, the current year, and the projected year. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that because of COVID, we felt very strongly that no school division would be penalized in this current year, nor will they be penalized in the next year. So I think if I move forward, I would probably like to just share how the weighted moving average is actually determined. And just give me just a moment to grab the correct sheet here. So the way that the weighted moving average works is that the current funding model did replace the old funding model, as I've said before. So the way it works is under the current funding model, nearly every major education system grant is calculated using the weighted moving average. So the way it works is they would use the current school year that it would be weighted at a 20% factor. The estimate of the previous school year is weighted at 20%, the current year is weighted at 30%, and the projection is weighted at 50%. The projected funding enrollment count will be determined based on Alberta Education's calculations and input from school authorities. So the school authorities themselves are the ones that are giving us their projections. And of course, we have seen that in the 2019-2020 year, and then there were actual numbers, but yet in the projections for the 2020-21, that school divisions, in fact, can sometimes err on the side of caution. In the 2019-2020 year, there were regular total students head count of 711,843, and in the 2020-21 projection count, they projected 730,030 students. So that's quite a difference, approximately 19,000 student difference project.
Thank you, Minister. And now we're going to go to Ms. Hoffman.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I just want to ask two things that relate back to curriculum again. I know the minister wants to give details later, but we're here to debate the budget today. So consistent with 1.1 key objective, implement new curriculum, we're here to debate the business plan and the budget. Where is that in the budget? The minister said in her budget, I don't think the minister's office budget is enough to actually implement the curriculum. So where in the budget for the people of Alberta, for the Ministry of Education, is the money to implement curriculum? And I appreciate that the minister wants to hold off on sharing that information, but this is the time and place to share information about the budget and how we're going to deliver on the key objectives in the business plan. Secondly, the minister's mentioned many times through you, Madam Chair, that professors, deans of education have given feedback on the draft curriculum in December. I understand that. Will the minister table in this House that feedback? And will she also provide the feedback from the educator groups as well? Many of them had lots to say about this, and I think it's only fair that, again, if 1.1 is about implementing new curriculum and the minister has touted that feedback was received, that feedback be given to the people of Alberta. This isn't just the minister's business plan, this is the business plan for the education system, and all Albertans are shareholders and stakeholders in that work and deserve to have transparency on it. I cede the remainder of my time to my colleague, Mr. Egan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member from Edmonton, Glenora. And I think that Albertans in general, Alberta families, specifically with students in grade school, teachers, school boards, are all very interested in pinning down when we're going to see this new curriculum rollout. There was a curriculum that was built and put in place for 2019. In that curriculum included the augmentation of basic math skills, development of literacy, identifying skills and competencies that went between the grades so that we could help to move kids from one developmental level to another in a much more sophisticated way through all different subject areas and grade levels. There was provision for financial literacy, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit study through all different grade levels, and a very strong focus as well on learning about different cultures and anti-racism. So let's say you had a student from 2019 that was in grade 3, then with these delays that we've seen thus far, that student would not be benefiting from new curriculum development in each of these subject areas when that person is in junior high, that same student, missing all of those development levels along the way and missing on making sure that those basic skills were augmented and developed with new curriculum. And so when we look at this budget here today, and I hear that the minister wants to bring forward some new curriculum development into the school system, but there's no money to support it, then I think all of us are asking a very pointed question here today. What is the plan? What's the plan for developing and rolling out new curriculum in the province of Alberta right now in this next fiscal year? If there's not money for it, then it's not going to happen. If there's another year's delay, again, that same student that would have benefited in grade 3 in 2019 from developing math skills, literacy, financial literacy, anti-racism, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit knowledge, developing skills and competencies, all of that has been lost on a generation of kids. I don't think it's fair that we have to wait another year. And if we're not waiting another year, you must make sure you're supporting it in this budget. Where's that money to support the implementation of new curriculum in this year's budget? Question mark.
Fantastic. And with that, we'll go to the minister for 5 minutes of question. All right.
For 5 minutes of answers? Sure. Thank you so much. So I've said it over and over again, but happy to repeat it. That I have indicated that we are very committed. Myself and our government is very committed to a successful rollout. We know it will require resources and professional development and supports, and that those dollars will not come out of the classroom. They are in my budget, and I will be happy to make that fully transparent when I make the announcement on the new curriculum in the near future. And when I look at the fact that we have been extremely transparent, and I've been provided copies of what we have on our webpage, and you can go to our webpage and see that we have an overview. We have the you can go to the curriculum advisory panel input, see what that input was, and who were the advisors, and we've just been so transparent, and we believe in continuing to be transparent, and we'll continue as further steps move forward to provide that transparency to the whole public. Step 2 is engagement. Step 3 was new ministerial order and student learning. Step 4, the guiding framework update. Step 5, the drafting. Step 6, the piloting in the classroom. Step 7, the implementation and next steps. And under each of those, we have the projected dates. We have the individuals who are involved. We have those documents that are hyperlinked that you can go to. It goes through all of the essentials that we have put in there, our focuses, what we've heard in general senses, and what areas we are focusing on. So it is very comprehensive. It's all online. I welcome all of you to have a look at it because, and we'll continue to update it as more and more becomes available. When the new curriculum is out, I am expecting every single one of you to have an in-depth look at it, and that we will have robust conversation on it. Just to highlight some of the pieces that have been mentioned in terms of diversity and anti-racism and Indigenous perspectives, I want to assure you that the new curriculum will reflect the diversity, the cultural perspectives, and the history of all Albertans. It will be aligned with the ministerial order and student learning that was announced in 2020. The ministerial order sets out the vision to guide education, update the curriculum, and strengthen the K-12 system. There's emphasis on essential knowledge, civic virtues, and outcomes students need to succeed in school and throughout all of their life. The ministerial order also provides outcomes for learning to strengthen inclusion and ensure Alberta students see themselves, their families, and their communities reflected in the curriculum. Every student should see themselves and their families and their communities reflected in the curriculum. Students will learn about the rich heritage of Alberta and Canada while valuing the strengths of diversity. They will study significant events in provincial, national, and world history and how they impact our current world. There will be opportunities to demonstrate commitment to the common good by exercising compassion, empathy, and support for each other in our diverse society. On anti-racism, Alberta's new K-12 curriculum will continue to address topics and concepts and issues related to anti-racism, particularly in social studies and wellness portions. Concepts, topics, and issues related to anti-racism, diversity, and pluralism may also be addressed in other subject areas such as English language arts and literature. All new curriculum will be aligned with the ministerial order, as I've said over and over again, and I cannot wait for you to have a look at it because I believe you will really see the tremendous effort and work that's gone into it. When we look at the rollout, we did inherit a draft of the K-6 curriculum. It was not put forward to the validation stage prior to my taking office. And so something that we heard very much through the election process was that the public of Alberta really wanted to see transparency in the whole development and implementation of this new curriculum. And we heard that promise. We were elected very strongly. Over 1 million people elected our government based in part on that promise to provide transparency, and we have done so. We will continue to do so as well.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we go over to MLA Glasgow.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. I get to ask you another couple of questions, which is always exciting for me because I love getting the opportunity to exchange with you. I am going to ask some questions about PUF funding, as I know that this is a matter of great importance for you to be taking care of the most vulnerable, whether that be in school or within society or those who can't speak for themselves. I know, Minister, that you care a great deal about providing dignity for those, for all, and for making sure that we can do our best to care for the vulnerable within society. Like I said, in all ways, but especially in your role as Minister of Education, I know that this is something that is on your heart and something that you and I have spoken about extensively. I've received feedback from constituents, which is why I think it's important that I ask you this question. As you know, I'm their representative here in the legislature, and while it might be a critical question, I think it is very important that I do my job as an MLA in asking it on PUF funding. So we know that you've made changes to PUF last year, and that some students who previously received supports from PUF might now receive them from another program, so either a specialized learning support or what have you. And I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that this was to ensure continuity of supports when students move, I believe, from ECS to kindergarten or from kindergarten to grade 1, or however that works. I'm not, like I said, I'm asking for clarification as well, because I'm just trying to get clarity on this for a couple constituents so that I know better when I go back to speak to them, of course, because that ultimately is what I'm here to do. So I'll frame it by saying that. And then, so I am questioning, and I'm sure you're well aware that you've received a lot of feedback, we'll say, on PUF funding, and this funding was it was established to support young children who've been identified with severe disability or delay, and I know that you agree that this is our responsibility as a government to be able to provide extra support for these children within our education system, and I know that you work with the Ministry of Children's Services on many of these things as well. And it seems to me that your budget does reflect this, that your deep care for this. It's my understanding from reading the funding manual to school authorities that the PUF grant is included in line 3.2 of the estimates under learning support funding, and if you could clarify that would be great. So I guess, Minister, my question will be, can you please confirm that this funding is accounted for in your budget and show us which line item it's under, just specifically, so that when constituents ask, I can point to that line item. And could you please explain, I guess, elaborate on this, how this grant supports students, and how these changes or what have you, perceived changes might come across that way. And I guess I would just like to hear what inclusion of these students in our classrooms means to you, Minister, because I know that you do have quite a serious a background in this with your brother and with your past experience as a rehabilitation. I can't remember, rehabilitative practitioner, I believe your former role was. And I know that this is, like I said, protecting the most vulnerable is something that you have sought to do in every aspect of your life. You know, I know that this is something that's very, very important to you. So I believe MLA Smith has a question regarding this as well. So I am going to yield my time to MLA Smith so that we can try to stay on the same topic and get you to answer these questions in one go.
All right, and with that, MLA Smith.
Thank you. How much time do I have?
A minute.
1 minute? Okay, I'll be real quick. The question that I want to ask you, Minister, is what is this support, the PUF funding, going to look like compared to last year's budget? I know that I had colleagues reaching out to me, many former teachers or teachers, concerned about the PUF funding and how it was going to be rolled out last year. And so I guess the question that I've got then this year is, what will the support going forward into this coming year look like compared to last year's budget? Okay, thank you very much.
Spectacular. And to the Minister for 5 minutes of response.
Sure, thank you so much. Can you hear me all right? I heard some echoing. So Thank you so much for the questions. Absolutely, PUF unit funding is and continues to be, has been, will be, and will, moving forward, continue to be an integral part of our ECS funding in our province. As I've indicated, we are the only jurisdiction that uses PUF for 2 years, 8 months, the youngest in all of Canada to actually provide assessment, diagnosis, and services to severe disability or severe language delay students. And so I'm very proud of that, and it I do know the impact that that has going forward. We want to set up our students, particularly our special needs students, with success. And so what we did here in the past was that those students that were in kindergarten after they, when PUF was available in kindergarten, that once they left kindergarten, they faced a huge cliff where the funding was no longer available. And so we introduced the Specialized Learning Supports Grant. And you're right, MLA Glasgow, that that falls under the overall envelope of learning supportive learning, the learning support funding envelope. And I apologize that there's very similar titles. So the Specialized Learning Support, the PUF funding grant, those two grants fall under the learning support funding envelope, which is going to be at record levels with the additional increase of $40 million in this upcoming school year. That funding, overall learning support funding envelope, will be at $1.356 billion, $40 million than the previous budget. And it does cover many grant items, including specialized learning support, the PUF funding, the FNMI grant, the ESL, the French language, the refugee, the social economic, the geographic, and the school nutrition grant. I can highlight for you that in the 2020-21 school year, in the Specialized Learning Supports grant, we spent $556 million. And in the PUF pre-K, we spent $80 million. So a good portion, approximately half of the dollars of that overall learning support grant went to these two specialized funds, grant funds, to, of course, provide the supports that are most necessary for those students. And you know, I just want to break down for you some of the supports that students do receive. You know, they are able to, school divisions are able to provide those students with additional supports, whether they're, you know, perhaps they need a technological item to help them in their learning. Perhaps they need an educational assistant. Perhaps there are any number of additional resources, whether they are through assessment or through actual tangible resources. Those school divisions get that additional funding on top of the base funding for those students. And this is very important to understand, that all those students are funded at the base level first and foremost, and then these additional funds are provided on top of that base funding to address their most ardent needs. The program unit funding, as I said earlier, is something that we continue to hear about, and that in my reevaluation of the whole learning support funding envelope over the next few weeks, we will delve even further into. We continue to work with all our education partners and ensure that those special needs students do indeed get the supports that they require. And when the new funding manual and the funding profiles are actually put out at the end of March, you will see how we are able to address not only the specialized learning support, or the SLS, which kindergarten supports all students through kindergarten all the way to grade 12, so that that learning support is consistent throughout all of the education journey, not just in kindergarten, but right through from kindergarten, grade 1, right up to grade 12. So those students are not forgotten in the upper years.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we go to Mr. Deol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Minister, to you, Madam Chair. My question is actually very specific to the school, the new high school in Edmonton Southeast. The announcement on this school was made last year in 2020. When the announcement was made, we were almost, at the opportunity, or you could say the verge of losing this project. As the Edmonton School Board said, this is the project on the top priority list last year, and if we wouldn't move ahead on that, there would have been risk losing the opportunity. There was quite confusion last year on design funding. When I tried to get the information through my office, I had a different information, but my constituents actually had a bit different information than I was able to receive through my office. But saying this, day before yesterday, I put this question to the infrastructure minister. So where we are on this in terms of capital planning funding, he said that this school has actually funding available in this budget. And it was surprising for me to see today's announcement looking into the school projects that is not on the list. So my question to you specifically is, I also looked into the websites. I did not find any completion date for this. So where we are on this, is this school capital funding available for this school? And I also like to cede my time to Member Hoffman. She wanted to add more into this question. Thank you once again.
Well, thanks, Ms. Hoffman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just to reiterate that the question around what line item is the curriculum money has been asked probably at least 2 or 3 times, and we haven't been given an answer as to what line item in the budget. And that question is definitely in order. I've been either participating or observing estimates since 2008 under Ed Stelmach's leadership, questions that are specifically tied to key objectives and to questions around which line item those objectives will be funded through. If the minister isn't willing to answer that question, I think it is such an affront to democracy, because this is core and foundational to the work we do as members of the Assembly in debating the budget. Knowing what the objectives are and where they line up in the budget is pretty standard. So I'm happy to receive that answer through you, Madam Chair. Other questions I wanted to touch on at this point are around transparency. Again, we didn't get an answer. We got definitely some comments around this being transparent, but we didn't get any commitment to actually table the feedback that was given around the curriculum. Other topics I want the minister to touch on include the school nutrition program. Which line item does that fit within this budget, and can we have a breakdown as to what it was and what it will be this year? As well, I wanted to touch on the fact that I appreciate that there is a continued commitment, which was started around the time under Minister Egan's leadership, to ensuring that we do move forward with new school construction having playgrounds attached to them. And I know the flowery language that was used around that, and echo the commitment and the necessity of having playgrounds with new school construction. But we also need playgrounds with existing schools when they reach their life expectancy. So I don't believe that the minister said anything about that, but is there any commitment to expanding playground commitments for mature schools? And lastly, as it relates to playgrounds, there was reference to if schools want to do something like add a ramp to make their playground more accessible, they can pay out of pocket to do that. I think that is inclusivity should be a foundation of this initiative around building new playgrounds at any school site. Recess is supposed to be one of the best times of day, and we know that it is one of the most isolating times of day for students who have disabilities, a variety of disabilities. So will the minister commit to changing policy around that and ensuring that playgrounds that are funded by the people of Alberta are inclusive, so that all students have an ability to play on them? So to recap, the Southeast timelines for the Southeast High School, the school nutrition program, which line item is which line items within the budget are key objective 1.1 to be implemented under in terms of the rollout of the curriculum? playgrounds and ensuring that they're more inclusive and
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman, and to Minister LaGrange for 5 minutes of response.
Thank you so much. So I'm happy to respond back on the Edmonton Southeast School. That school was in design phase originally, and then last year in the 2020 year, it went to full funding. And so that there are 5 new high schools that are anticipated to open in September of 2024 with a total student capacity of approximately 6,375 students. So there is the one in Edmonton, grades 10 to 12 school in Southeast Edmonton for Edmonton Public Schools. There is the one in Black Falls, the grades 9 to 12 school for Wolf Creek Public Schools. There is the grade 10 to 12 school in Heritage Valley for Edmonton Catholic Schools. There is the one in Langdon, grade 7 to 12 school for Rocky View Schools. And there is the one in Leduc from grades 10 to 12 for Black Gold School Division. And so those are all slated to open in September of 2024. The understanding that I have right now is that the design phase appears to be complete or close to complete, and that their procurement is underway. So very good news for Southeast Edmonton that by 2024, that school will be built and have students in it. And it'll be a state-of-the-art, top-of-the-line school that the students there will be proud to be part of and will benefit from those excellent, excellent learning spaces that will be there. So I am happy to clarify for those who were not sure where things were at. In terms of the curriculum funding, again, I would state that I had stated it many times, but happy to answer it again, that it is coming out of my Department of Education. And starting in 2021-22, you'll note that there are minor changes in funding in the department. As we begin curriculum implementation, the department will support school authorities in the development and procurement of resources through centralized management. And that is on page 102 of the business plan. Fiscal plan. So just to clarify that piece, fiscal plan, page 102. When we look at the nutrition grant, it is, as I said earlier, one of the grants that falls under that $1.356 billion of the student learning supports. And for the budget 2021, it was at $16 million. So just to clarify that, I believe that was the question, and if I've missed that question because I didn't fully hear it, please feel free to ask it again in the next round of questions. The playgrounds, absolutely. Playgrounds is something that, when I was the trustee for 11 and a half years, it just never made sense to me that we were building schools, particularly elementary schools or K-9 schools, that did not even have a playground. I know of some school authorities that didn't have a playground for 5 to 6 years after a school was built. This is not something that we should continue on with. And so I felt very, very strongly that we need to provide schools with the resources so that they weren't burdened with the extreme costs of building a playground. I know when I went to school, like many of you, the playgrounds were pretty simple. They were, pretty basic playgrounds, basically some pipe that was welded together and a swing on the other end of it. And if you had a slide, that was a huge win. Now those playgrounds are just beautiful beyond belief. They really engage students. They are just works of art, but they also come with a very high price tag. So a really good quality, state-of-the-art playground is $250,000 roughly. Well, you can get some maybe in that 150 to 200,000, but we're providing every school division with $250,000 to build the best playground possible. And absolutely, we're looking for elements that are inclusive. But I do know that some school divisions have spent $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 and even more because they felt they wanted to go the, go to the additional extreme to get something that was even more enhanced because they had specific requirements.
Thank you, Minister. Appreciate that. And now we're on to Miss Lovely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for this opportunity to ask you a question. When I'm door knocking, parental choice comes up all the time. So my question is, we know that parents, not politicians, are always in the best position to make decisions on how their child should be educated. Alberta has a long and successful history of supporting choice within our education. I was pleased to see on page 32 of the business plan, key objective 4.1, support choice within the education system. So, Minister, my question is, can you outline some of the ways the government has empowered parents and cemented school choice into our education system? And I have another question. We know that Albertans value choice in education, and protecting the right to school choice was something that this government campaigned on. Parents, and not politicians, have the right to choose what kind of education works best for their children. This government has upheld the right for parents and school choice in Alberta, respecting parental rights that have been overtaken by political agendas and failed teaching fads. Under Outcome 4 on page 32 of the business plan, you explicitly state that key objective 4.1 is to support choice within the education system. Can you discuss the efforts your ministry is taking to continue to support school choice in Alberta? And next, under initiatives supporting key objectives on the same page, I see $811 million is being allocated to sustain existing school facilities in Alberta. What projects will this money support for better education for Alberta students? And with that, I'd like to cede my time to Member Rutherford.
It's lovely. And now on to Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Chair. How much time is
3 minutes and 15 seconds.
Perfect. Minister, this past year hasn't been easy on anyone. I think that's pretty obvious to state. And the global pandemic has completely upended our usual way of life. And we know that this has had a huge impact on families and kids. And so the routine and that sense of normalcy is so important in the development of young minds. And the pandemic has interfered with this. So we have seen this manifest in mental health issues in our youth. And this past year, and the importance of mental health supports for youth are always important, but I mean, there's really a light shone on it now as to how serious it can become. So my question is, can you speak to the supports available to students through the learning support funding? That's line 3.2 on page 73 of the estimates, or other grants in your ministry. And before we move on to answering that, I've had parents reach out this last year and really discuss overall the effect that this has had on their kids, the importance of them going to school. So when schools opened up originally in September, I know that was a big relief for many parents. And again, this past January, it's important to have kids in routine. And to be able to interact with other people their age and be a part of that school, the school culture and receiving education, it's important. And so I'm glad to see that efforts were made to make sure that schools could remain open and do so safely. I think you highlighted some numbers earlier on, maybe in your opening statement, since we're in about hour 5, I can't exactly say when it occurred, but I think you talked about the case rates that had occurred in schools, and it seems like aside from a few incidences that the parents, the teachers, and the kids have done really well at maintaining a safe environment so that those schools can remain open. And so, again, I'm just looking for some information around mental health supports through the learning support funding or other grants from your ministry.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. And now on to Minister LaGrange.
Great, thank you so much. As always, great questions. And I was very, very proud to be the minister who introduced the Choice in Education Act, to have that pass through. MLA Lovely, you indicated we do have a long, proud history of choice in Alberta. And that was certainly something that we heard loud and clear when we were campaigning, but even more so in the 2019 survey that we put out, when thousands, and actually it was over 50,000 Albertans shared their views on choice in education. We heard very clearly that they supported choice. And so when we passed that choice in education bill, it really did affirm that parents have the right to choose the type of education that they feel is best for their children. That, of course, they, not politicians, should have that choice available to them. And so, you know, we just celebrate the fact that we do have so many choices in Alberta, which is not found across Canada. And I believe it's one of the strong pillars that makes our education system so great in Alberta. We do have a public and separate school system. We have francophone schools. We have charter schools. We have independent private schools. We have early childhood education, and we have home education. And, you know, it is really something to celebrate, because this legislation that we introduced really does affirm that parents have the right to choose the kind of education they feel is best for their children. They have the right to the support, the creation of new charter schools, including vocation-based charter schools. It protects the status of independent private schools. And it provides new options for parents who choose to homeschool their children. Given that we've had such a long, proud history, you would think that this was something that was never in question. But unfortunately, there was many questions, and many that were very fearful that these choices wouldn't exist. And so it was very important for our government to take the steps to really reinforce that they are valued and that they are respected throughout all of Alberta. And we're very, very proud of that. When we look at the COVID response, and thank you, MLA Rutherford, for your questions, because it has been hard. There has been anxiety. I know that there was tremendous anxiety when we were looking to open schools to in-classroom learning in September. It was a very anxious time because there were, you know, we were dealing with a pandemic which still had many unknowns. Yes, we had developed a very robust reentry plan with 3 scenarios. We had schools that were prepared. We had given the health guidelines. We continued to review the guidelines with Dr. Hinshaw and her team. All of those were put in place, but it's always the fear of the unknown. And as a mother and as a grandmother, I'm a mother of 7. I'm a grandmother now of 7 grandchildren. I understand that fear. I understood that, yes, while it was very important to get our students back with a teacher in front of them in the classroom so that they could have that socialization, that ability to be with their peers, to have that interaction, and that we did recognize that there would be anxiety, and that this will be something we will be looking to deal with for probably a long time. So we did recognize that as a government, that COVID-19 pandemic is both a health and social crisis. And so we've been addressing that through both immediate and long-term physical and mental health initiatives that the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions has been implementing. I've been working closely with them, as have all the other ministries, and we will continue to work closely on a number of initiatives. Under the Learning Support Funding envelope, I also want to highlight that we provide funding to school authorities to support student wellness. This includes psychological and social emotional support and access to mental health workers and behavioral consultants. So that is funded under our student wellness program allocation, because it does recognize that children and student wellness can affect classroom learning and social interactions, both of which are essential to their success. So funding is provided to create capacity among school authorities to offer children and students wellness programs that will help improve their educational outcomes. And some of the
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we're going to Miss Irwin.
Thank you.
Sorry, Member Irwin.
No sweat. Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to direct you to page 31 of the business plan, where you talk about increasing opportunities for hands-on learning experiences and apprenticeship trades and vocational education. And you know, I know firsthand, having been a teacher and administrator in rural Alberta, the importance of those programs. And you know, I would love to just get a little bit of clarity around how much funding is being allocated specifically to those areas. I have to tell you, we have heard some reports of schools losing programming, including dual credit opportunities. And you know, I was proud when I was working in Alberta Education to help oversee the expansion of dual credit programs, of course, under the leadership of previous Minister Egan. And you know, those are incredibly powerful programs. And to hear concerns that some boards may have to be ending dual credit opportunities is quite disheartening, because you know, from our perspective, there's so much room for growth in dual credit, and it's a perfect way to address your outcome there of increasing those hands-on learning experiences. And rural jurisdictions, of course, in particular, are facing some challenges. So I would just like to ask, you know, how will you ensure equitable access to experiential learning opportunities like dual credit, like RAP, the Registered Apprenticeship Program? What funding supports are in place? And I will cede my time to Mr. Egan.
Thank you, Mr. Egan.
Well, thank you, Member Irwin, and through the chair to the minister. I have kind of a sort of a mixed bag here of things that I wanted to ask about in different topic areas, so excuse the lack of unity of theme with my questions. I'm curious about, on your capital project, I see, for example, you have the Milk River renovation, and always when you're doing a major renovation, I think it's prudent to make sure that you are doing a cost evaluation against building a new structure altogether. And so I'm just curious if your capital department did undertake a comparative analysis to see if whether the Milk River renovation would compare up in cost efficiency to building a new structure. And then further to the capital project list that you released today, I'm curious to know how many of those capital projects are in fact P3s. We know that, again, we did a very careful analysis of the cost effectiveness and the efficiency and the practicality of P3 schools in the province of Alberta. And it kind of came up wanting, quite frankly. The P3 model simply was a way, I think, to defer capital costs further down a budget over a period of a number of years instead of a single year. And so it was more of an accounting practice than it was a reflection of the practical reality on the ground, where school boards and parents and communities want to have access and control over their school assets. They want to use the school for different purposes. They want to make changes and renovations to those physical buildings, and they would like to have that ownership to make those decisions. P3s interfere with that process, quite frankly, and you know, the myriad of challenges around the province. I think you could be very aware of that as minister if you choose to look it up, of dissatisfied communities, school boards, individual teachers, parents, families, kids, when they ended up with a P3 school. So how many of those are P3 schools? Did you do an analysis of cost efficiency and effectiveness when making those choices for those capital projects? And could you release that information for us specifically on Milk River? the renovation versus building a new school, and the other ones, if you did choose to build any of them as P3s. I'm curious as well, because there's quite a number of ones just for design, and so if you had 5 or 6 different schools there as a design announcement project, which I, sort of can understand the utility of doing that, maybe not so many on one budget, but again, you would be engaging with a private company to go through that design phase. And so if, you've made that choice, you've gone down that road, then you can tell us who you've hired.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. And now to Minister LaGrange.
Thank you so much, and appreciate all the great questions. The question on dual credit and those supports for students that are really wanting to have an experiential learning experience, and I know very well, I have 7 children, 3 of whom are in the trades, so I very much understand the value of being able to have those experiences early on, to be able to even get a portion of your trades certificate, or have the ability to have it count in terms of credits towards a post-secondary. There's a number of avenues that they can explore in that area, and so I absolutely understand and recognize the value of this. We are, through this program and the continuation of the programs, enabling our youth to explore careers and trades, and in the trades and in technology, which is critical to our economic future, that we have these valuable professions respected. And so when we look at the career and technology studies programs provided through programs that are provided, the opportunity for Alberta students to learn a trade or a vocation at their school through Journey certificated tradespeople is critical. So we want to continue that. We know that these valuable skills that students learn are taught by qualified instructors. So the department has begun intakes right now for the 21-22 cohort of the Career and Technology Studies Bridge to Certification program. So this is often called the CTS Bridging Program, and many of you may be aware of it. This program allows school authorities to apply for $50,000 per participant in conditional grant funding to sponsor and support qualified individuals to complete an Alberta teacher preparation program. So through this CTS bridging, certificated journeyman persons are able to, or healthcare professionals, or informational technologists, they can work to become a teacher, and they can pursue all of their educational requirements to get their teaching certificate, so that they are able to teach our students. So this is one way that we are enhancing the ability for our young people to actually have those experiences. Now, we do know that the RAP programs were affected by the pandemic. Obviously, when businesses were having to close, students were not allowed onto job sites, but I understand that since that time, many of those students have been able to go back into their previous work experience endeavors. Again, I bring your attention back to the fact that we funded on a projected head count of 730,000 students when 705,000 students attended. And so school boards did have the ability to maintain all of those valuable dollars, even though they had lower enrollment counts, to support their students, including the students that are in these wonderful programs that we value so much. In terms of the P3s and MLA, again, I totally understand what you're talking about. As a former trustee, former board chair, we had experience with P3s, but it wasn't the infrastructure or the school itself. It was actually the contract that was of issue. And so that is something that I know Minister Panda, the Minister of Infrastructure, who actually is overseeing the builds of the schools. As you know, the determination of which schools are to be built is within my department. As Jeff had indicated earlier, it goes through that very intense gated process. And then once there is a determination of funds available by Treasury, then those schools are chosen and they are turned over to infrastructure to then oversee the builds of. And so infrastructure really is the department that oversees the building of the new schools or major modernizations. They do all of the assessments and then assign it to contractors. So they will be the determinants of whether it becomes a P3 or not. In terms of the Milk River, I am quite...
Thank you, Minister. With that, we go back to the Government Caucus and Mr. Amory.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I hope you can hear me okay. Minister, I want to take this opportunity to also thank you for providing your insight and your vision for our children in this province in the next fiscal year and throughout the rest of the mandate and beyond. I've listened with great interest. I know that we are nearing the end of this very long day of estimates, but I do have a very important issue that I want to raise with you. A personal issue that impacts me and impacts many Albertans. As you already know, Minister, I have 3 young children, 2 of which now are in the Calgary public school system. And I'm sure I speak for many of the very proud parents in Calgary Cross and throughout our province when I say that we have all had and continue to have some concerns with respect to our children as they deal in this post-COVID world. As they return back to school, I think there were a lot of questions. Obviously, you heard many of those, and so have all of us. And we continue to hear that, and I frankly still have some of those questions as well. My own experience as minister, I would submit to you, resembles something similar to the experiences of many of our parents, especially with younger children, and that is this. The COVID-19 protocols are being followed very diligently. I've had the opportunity to visit my children's schools. I've had the opportunity of visiting other schools. And I know that staff and educators throughout our province are implementing the COVID protocols diligently and universally. But the reality is that young children simply need a lot more supervision and guidance when it comes to ensuring that they adhere to the protocols of social distancing, mask policy protocols, and so on and so forth. Now, Minister, with all due respect to all of my colleagues, I think a lot can be learned by going through the line items and the plan, and I think a lot can be learned from hearing about real world stories. And I want to let you know that these real world tangible examples from those who are directly impacted, including myself, I think might be helpful to you in your ministry and as you move forward. I can tell you now, Minister, that my 5-year-old daughter has lost more masks than I care to remember. And so I have a seemingly endless supply of masks in my car just to keep them stocked for when those days that I'm fortunate to drop her off at school, but she doesn't have a mask, and that happens more often than not, quite frankly. But the underlying issue here really is, Minister, that I want to be satisfied, and all parents want to be satisfied, that our students are returning back to school and returning to their classrooms in the safest possible manner. And I know that the safe return of our students to the classroom has been a priority for all parents in Alberta, and quite honestly, a priority for you in all of the discussions that I have been fortunate enough to be at and to hear from you. I think that has been a fundamental priority for you as we move through this COVID world. It's something that parents, teachers, and all Albertans have been asking us to ensure. And I think if I were to tell you what I received the most feedback on, it is by far our our safe return of the students to classrooms. And I think this is really one of the most important things that we can do throughout this pandemic. Minister, I've read your fiscal plan with great detail and with great interest, and obviously many of my colleagues have done the same. But on page 85, it outlines a $263 million grant from the federal government for the Safe Return to School program. Now, we know that this funding was earmarked for a number of different things: improving air ventilation, hand sanitization, and hygiene, purchasing PPE, and so on and so forth. But my question is a little bit more specific than that. My question is this: how has this money been spent? And what is the overall impact to the education system? And in particular, how has it ensured, or how will it continue to ensure, the safe return of our students? Moreover, I want to know, in addition to that, are there any residual effects of these funds that will continue to benefit our schools over the long term as we navigate through COVID? And I don't think a whole lot of us knew how long that COVID would last. We probably still don't know. But can we expect to see the application of these funds and their impacts in the long term and not just in the short term? Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Amory, and now to the Minister.
Thank you. Great question, and very top of mind, because every decision, sorry, is there a technical issue? Okay, I lost video, so as long as you can see me and hear me, that's fine. Every decision that was made has been made through the lens of safety as the #1 priority for both our students and our staff. And I cannot tell you how that weighs heavily on myself and those in my department, as well as all the education partners and Dr. Hinshaw and her team that provide us ongoing guidance and support. I often say I have 7 children, but I actually now feel like I have over 700,000 children that I'm looking after, and it is something that I look at every one of those students as if they were my own student, my own child. What would I do, and how would I want them looked after? And so it is very, very important that that we provide the most safe return to class possible. And while we haven't been perfect, because this is all new, the pandemic has been new, we feel we have had great successes, as you have articulated. I do hear those real world stories. I do hear from parents. Of course, I'm in my community. I'm actually out and about in terms of lots of Zoom calls with all the education partners. I meet with the zones, and I hear directly from both trustees and superintendents, but also from teachers and from parents. I've had numerous letters written to tell me what's been good, what hasn't been so good, and we continue to look at refining the process. We also know that right now we have variants of concern, and so we are monitoring those very, very closely. I get daily updates on the numbers of students and staff that have of current cases that have actual COVID, as well as where those schools are. So I am constantly looking at these numbers, and it's very, very important. So when that $263 million of federal funding was transferred as part of a bigger initiative by the federal government to all school divisions right across Canada, I felt very strongly that those people that are at the front lines, the school boards who are dealing with very unique situations from one end of the province to the other, are the ones that are in the best position to make the decisions. And so $250 million, the vast majority of that $263 million was distributed to school authorities on a per student basis. So it was equitable right across the whole system. And I know that was valued. I know other jurisdictions across Canada have chosen to do things differently and have utilized those supports in other ways. But I felt very strongly that it needed to go to the school jurisdictions themselves, and what the requirements were that they had to be used for COVID-related items. So school authorities had to use them for COVID-related items. They had to track those items, and we had to report back in December through the Premier in a letter to the Prime Minister that then would release, if we actually did adhere to their requirements, that we were able to get the second tranche. So it was divided, that 263 was divided in half. We got the first half in the first half of the school year, and now we've received the second half. So $160 million is used, has been used in this fiscal year, and the remaining 90 million is continuing on into the next fiscal year, even though, because of course, the government fiscal year does not align with the school year. So education worked with our education partners on the safe reentry guidance and how to best distribute these funds. And so, as I said, the school authorities used these funds to address staffing. They addressed adaptation of learning spaces. They used it for personal protective equipment needs. They used it for cleaning and safety. They used it for considerations in their schools in terms of
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we move on to Ms. Hoffman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I expect this is probably going to be my last opportunity to speak during these estimates. So I want to sort of summarize a few of the key themes that I've heard and get the Minister's response to them. First, I want to say thank you for clarifying specifically page 102 of the fiscal plan. And I will note for the Minister and for all who are following this, that the Department of Education Operations is going to be $5 million less in the next year than it is currently forecast to be in this current year. So this is the line item the Minister said that the curriculum rollout is going to be funded under. When I looked at the other tables in the fiscal plan around staffing, there's actually a decrease of 1 FTE planned for the Minister's, for the Department of Education. And the Minister says that this is the line item, and these are the people who are going to be responsible for the rollout of arguably the first phase of the biggest curriculum rewrite our province has ever experienced. So it doesn't give me a ton of confidence that that's going to be executed with the resources that students and staff require to have a successful transition in terms of previous curriculum and this curriculum when that is the line item and that it is being cut. Now the Minister's probably going to say, well, it's going to be up $5 million from. Oh, it is through the chair. Yeah. I didn't say that to the Minister. I said she's probably going to say it, which means I'm speaking through the chair, Madam Chair. But she's probably going to say, well, the increase of it's an increase of $5 million over budget. But the difference is that the forecast this year, the department spent $98 million, and next year they're planning on spending $93, according to the estimates that we're being asked to approve. So that is a $5 million cut to the resources available to support curriculum implementation at a time where there's going to be more work done and needed to be done to support that curriculum implementation. There is an increase projected for Department of Education Operations in the 2 out years. There's also an increase projected for education property tax for the 2 years in the out years. So this is a time when Alberta families, I think, need and deserve a government that's going to be there to support them. And we see that the government's going to be reaching into Albertans' pockets rather than funding the proper implementation of curriculum. And perhaps it's that the Minister isn't ready to do a full implementation this year, and that's why it isn't being properly funded, but I don't think that that's fair to the students of Alberta. In terms, I also want to highlight and get the Minister's confirmation, again, reading through the budget estimates, line item 3.2, learning support funding, again, being cut, this time $257 million compared to the forecast for this year. So this year, learning support funding, which is the line item that we keep being told to go to for things like PUF and other inclusive education grants, this year, $1.6 billion invested, next year, 1.3. So I'm rounding, obviously, the difference of a cut of $257 million over what's being spent this year to support learning support funding. I don't think that again, instills a high degree of confidence. This is at the same time that we know the Minister's own numbers at the beginning of the day clarified that there will be, and reiterated what finance officials told us, 20,000 more students planning on going to school next year through whatever form that might be, whether it's home learning or learning in a school environment. 20,000 more students. The fiscal plan also shows us that there will be more than 2,000 fewer staff there to support them. And we see that the funding that's intended is going to be far lower next year for that learning support funding, according to the government's own general estimate. So will the minister confirm that the line item 3.2 is accurate in her budget? Definitely doesn't seem to be reflected in a lot of the messaging we're hearing, but it's in black and white on page 73, line item 3.2. And I also just want to say this is a time when we've talked about the number of students going up, but also the needs going up. We know that Alberta students have had a significant gap in terms of their learning, as complicated by the chaos that's happening in our world right now, the number of times they've been sent home to isolate, the transition between online and home and back to school environments multiple times. We know that this has been an incredibly difficult year. There have been learning gaps, there have been social emotional gaps, there have been mental health and psychological gaps, and students need more support next year, not less. So cutting 2,000 staff from the numbers of staff who used to be there pre-COVID, Madam Chair, doesn't reflect the needs of Alberta students. The minister, celebrated sustainable, predictable, but fails to talk about adequacy. And the real question is, are we adequately supporting students? And I would say no.
Thank you, and to the minister for a response.
Well, thank you for those questions. I believe we've gone over this over and over again, but I'm happy to do it again and point out the inconsistencies in what I've just heard from the member opposite. When I look at the page 102, Department of Education, when you look at the budget for 2021, it was 88 million, and in estimate, it's in 21-22, it's 93 million. What the member opposite was comparing was obviously the forecast, which of course there's many other things that are in forecast because we are in a pandemic year, and so there are items in there. When I go to 302, again, going from forecast to estimate, the actual budget for this line item for learning support funding for the 2020-21 year was $1,315,179,000. It is now going up $40 million to $1.356 billion, or $1,356,090. When you look at the forecast, which was $1.6 billion, that includes, and I've said it before, all of the COVID-related funding adjustments. So I will read them again. There were $248.6 million that were used for the reopening safely of schools, funded through the federal government. There was an additional $39.4 million decrease for frontline education worker wage top-up as part of the government's critical worker benefits. So these, of course, are the decreases that are now reflected in the new estimate because those were added in the forecast. There is $10 million for the purchase of PPE that was also in that number. Another adjustment in that number was an increase to enhance what I've been saying all along, that $40.9 million to enhance the specialized learning envelope, the actual learning support funding envelope, which oversees those specialized learning grants, the SLS grant, the program unit funding grant, the English as a second language and French language grant, the refugee student grant, the First Nations Métis and Inuit grant, socioeconomic status grant, geographic grant, and of course the school nutrition grant. Again, I want to go back to the member comments in terms of the number of students, reiterating that the projected numbers for the 2021-22 headcount is 725,955 students. That is correct. That is the projected headcount. But the projected headcount in last year, in the 2021 year, which we are funding fully, is the 730,030 students. So as you can see, we are currently funding through our new funding model, the weighted moving average model, for 730,000 students, when in fact it is only projected that we will see in this upcoming year 725,955 students. Again, we are continuing to fund our education system extremely well. We did not want to penalize anyone that had forecasted above, which there were numerous. because as I said earlier, in the 2019-2020 year, our actual numbers were 711,843 students, total headcount students. And in fact, in 2021, in 2020-21, the number of students that actually were in our schools was 705,917. We did not penalize any school division, nor will we penalize them in this upcoming year. And again, I want to reiterate that we have very healthy school reserves. They have gone from $363 million in the 2019 year to, as of August 31st of 2020, $383.6 million in operating reserves. And again, an additional, so that's $21 million increase overall. And in the capital reserves, they've gone from 208 to 221 as of August 31st of 2020. So an additional $13.4 million increase. And it is wonderful to also be able to share that in budget 2021, we are going to provide, on top of the funding that we've already allowed students to maintain, even though they experienced lower enrollment, an additional $130 million in mitigation funding that holds harmless school divisions. So,
Thank you, Minister. And now we move on to Mr. Gottfried.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Minister as well for really giving us an incredible amount of detail around Budget 2021 today. And I just wanted to thank her and her staff for a budget that does continue to ensure that Albertans are some of the best funded education system, best funded students across the country, which I think is a great commitment to the future, which we all know is a bright one. I'd also like to thank you for the capital investment, over $1 billion in capital investment. And I come from a more mature community where I see I have one modernization on the CBE list, which I hope is going to happen. Many of the schools are, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years old in the area, and certainly that I think is something that's required. Minister, I know we're tight on time, so I'm going to move straight into my question on experiential learning. We hear a lot about it. In fact, the Premier uses the term parity of esteem for many of the trades when he talks about them and through the work that he did when he was a federal minister. And I know we're moving towards that in the post-secondary world as well, but on page 31 of the business plan, one of the key objectives I see is key objective 1.4 is quote unquote an increase in opportunities for hands-on learning experiences in apprenticeship, trades, and vocational education. We know that hands-on learning in all forms is a great opportunity for students of today, but this demonstrates that not everybody is on a path to university, but that we have incredible trade schools and other vocations which students can do. Can you tell us a bit more about this objective, what the ministry is doing, what you're doing to meet this objective for our students? And as a secondary question on that would be, I note that there's only a performance metric listed under outcome one is high school completion rate. So I see there's some targets and objectives in there, but I'd like to understand how that relates to this objective and how we're going to make sure that Alberta students have the access to those apprenticeships, trades, and vocational education, which we know is so important. I'll cede my rest of my time to the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gottfried. Now to the Minister for.
great, thank you. And again, critical programs for our students. It really does enhance their educational experience and their trajectory as they move forward from education on into the real world of whether they pursue a trade or whether they pursue some other post-secondary academic endeavor. I know that Minister Nicolaides and I have spoken quite often on how we can align so that the transition from K to 12 is more seamless as they go into post-secondary or into any one of the trades that they're looking to move forward in. So I just wanted to add something that I hadn't been able to say in the previous answer on this particular issue, is that in the Career and Technical Studies grant, we are providing $800,000 for rural school programming, which allows rural schools to bring in instructors who are specialized in their occupations and provide career-related training to those students. So that's in addition to all of the other supports that we are currently giving. given, because we often see that rural schools, typically because of their location from a post-secondary, do not have the same ability to access those specialized career technologists and trainers. And so that was very important that we provide that equity across the system. I do know that school authorities are becoming very innovative and creative, and we have various examples of that where they are partnering with post-secondaries via virtual training. And so that is, given the emerging technologies that we have, that is something that they're really tapping into and really ensuring that they can provide a diversity of programming. Typically, you will have remembered probably a decade or two ago, the opportunities for students in dual credit was limited, but those have expanded greatly. There are so many more opportunities, so many more actual fields that they can get into and have that experiential learning. And it is critical to get that at an early age. Sometimes I hear from students themselves. I have a student minister's student advisory council, and I hear from my students that one of the elements of trying on some of these professions early on and having the dual credit experience or the RAP program experience, the CTS programs, is that they can try a field of study or a career choice that they think they might like, but sometimes they find out, you know what, it wasn't the best fit. And so even finding that out before they head into post-secondary, where the expense is much greater in terms of their commitment to tuition and to perhaps even living expenses and some of the other expenses when you go to a post-secondary, giving them that early ability to try on activities, to partner with businesses that can give them that hands-on training.
I apologize for the interruption, but I must advise the committee that the time allotted for the consideration of the ministry's estimates has now concluded. I would like to remind committee members that we are scheduled to meet next today, March 10th, 2021 at 7 p.m. to consider the estimates of the Ministry of Justice and Solicitor General. Before we conclude, I would just ask that everyone take any of their cups or drinks with them and clear the room, as we have a very quick timeline before the next meeting at 7 p.m. Thank you, everyone. The meeting is now adjourned.